infinite banking is not a thing. It's not transactional. It's a process. Nelson always used to talk about it. And that was one of the most difficult things for me because I'm kind of analytical about stuff. Every piece has got to fit. It's got to make sense. And Nelson's like, no, it's a process. You're getting wrapped up in the minutia. Stop doing that.
John and Jared, thank you for joining us on the Infinite Banking Initiative. This is kind of unique for us to have two guests on today, and we want to just get started by hearing your story, your connection with each other.
Well, sure. I've been doing infinite banking for quite a while. I think I met Nelson back in 2017, and Jared comes into the picture much later, just this past year, but at first as a client. And I'll let Jared talk about his story a little bit, but the ability to use the infinite banking policy to deal with real life contingencies as they happen couldn't be more powerfully stated than what happened to Jared. And so, Jared, I don't know if you want to, we were going to talk about this later, but why not talk about it now? So,
Sure.
As far as impact on a client, Jared came to me first as a client and then later on as a budding practitioner. So Jared has a wonderful story. Jared, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate the intro, John. I mean, the IBC concept just in general kind of got thrown my way probably a decade ago, and it just didn't stick. I didn't catch it. And so I put the book on the shelf and I let it go. And, I came back probably a decade later and picked the book back up again. And I was like, I've got to prove to myself that I was right a decade ago. I've got to prove to myself that I made the right call. And I couldn't prove to myself. The more I read it, the more it made sense, the more it I truly caught it. And so that was when I reached out to John and we got some, intro level stuff going. And the more I caught it, the more I knew I wanted to be a part of infinite banking as a whole, as the education piece, as, all the different aspects of it. It just made so much sense. I wanted to be a part of it.
But talk about, Jared, your entry into it when we wrote the contract, and
Yep.
You were a little bit frustrated with all the medical questions and the delays after delays and how that all unfolded for you.
Yeah, we initially had set it up that we were going to do a policy for both my wife and myself, kind of whatever that capital amount was, we were going to do half for her, half for me. Well, then that went through the process of underwriting and they wanted to see some more questions, some more tests, digging a little bit, which I understood. But what that ended up doing was uncovering a heart issue that I had no idea about. There was a EKG abnormality that I had over the last 3 years in my aviation medical exam, and that doctor wasn't worried about it. So I just kept flying. Well, then the underwriting for Lafayette basically found out that their same abnormality was there, but they wanted more. And more meant a stress test and beyond, and then more meant an echo. And the echo ended up uncovering that I had a low ejection fraction and low heart output, which downed me from flying. So at first it was really, really frustrating because it was like, why did I do this to myself? Why did this come about? And then, you step back 3 months later as a guy with 3 daughters and a wife. What an absolute blessing that exam was to allow me to uncover something that could have taken me out. So, it was an initial frustration in the process, but it didn't take long to be able to step back and go, this was an absolute blessing to have uncovered this. But, when you look at it from a bigger picture, what I should have done was started that policy 10 years ago. Had I caught that earlier, I would have been able to have that underwriting piece completed when there was no issue, be able to complete that and then have a whole slew of protections available when this does happen. So if you want to talk about a living, breathing example of why these policies are not only so important for your finances, but for your health and for your protection of your family, I'm your living, breathing example. So I knew once I caught it that I wanted to be involved. And then the more and more I dug in with John, I knew that this was going to be something that I wanted to be a part of. So John was like, let's just go back to back. Let's keep working on this stuff. Let's see where it goes. And then within a year, I'm applying to be in the practitioner program and now have been accepted. And I'm going through that process as well. So it's an absolute blessing. I couldn't be more excited on what it brings, not only for me personally, but how I can share my story to help out with others, to encourage, get involved when you can, and get involved while your health is still good.
Fortunately for Jared, he and I both work for an airline, and we have some pretty good benefits over there that backstops both of us for disabilities and contingencies like this that crop up. But a lot of people don't have that, and fortunately, this is going to work out great for Jared. I have every optimism that he's going to be just fine and going to be doing great. But for somebody not similarly situated, had they stepped back a few years before what Jared discovered, they would have had access not to their cash value, but to their death benefit. That a percentage of that death benefit, 2 of the 6 ADLs, activities of daily living. The people that do infinite banking professionally understand that, but the average consumer out there, that's huge. Because if you have a terrible car wreck, anything happens in your life, and you can't feed yourself, you can't dress yourself, you can't. There's a lot of things. The 6 ADLs, you can look them up. But if you can't do 2 of the 6, you have access not only to the cash value, but to the death benefit amount, which is beyond what you've put into the policy. What a great benefit on top of the benefits of using this as a banking policy. That's just people look that they don't understand the power of this stuff. It's huge.
Well, so John, how did you first discover the infinite banking concept? You said you've been in practice for quite a while.
Right. I started my company not in infinite banking, but my financial company back in 2008. And that was an outcropping of some things that happened in the other industry that Jared is very familiar with. I had a wife and 5 kids, and I had to figure things out. So I had a insurance company, and I became an advocate along the way of Austrian economics and sound money. And I began to understand very clearly that our problem was a spending one, not an income one with our government. And the 2 dragons that we had to slay individually and as businesses was inflation and taxation. So if you got inflation and taxation, what are they? Inflation is nothing more than shadow taxation. They're printing more money. So as you step back and say, how in the world can I keep more of my money so I have actual dollars to spend? I have purchasing power. I was looking for something for my clients that would give them more purchasing power. And we spend all our time focused on our investments. Maybe it's 5, 10, 15, even 20% of our income going into an investment portfolio under a qualified plan, which the government controls, your partnership plan with the IRS. And they completely ignore that other 80, 85% of the money. That's where Nelson comes in. And Nelson said, look, this is the eureka moment you need. You should be capitalizing your infinite banking contract, put the money in there, and then when you need it, you have access to that capital, and it's growing while you're waiting. So it's doing something about inflation. It's doing something about taxation. Why? Because it's not a taxable event inside that contract. It's growing tax-free. That is extremely powerful. Jared and I have had many discussions about, compounding interest and uninterrupted compounding interest. This contract is uninterrupted compounding interest. It's unlike your 401k and all the other investments that you're out there. If you slide back, you have a bad year and you lose 30%, you're starting 30% in the hole. With infinite banking, you're starting where you left off that next year every single year. So 4% even year over year over year is so powerful. What would your taxable equivalent be to do that same thing? It's huge. It is so powerful that I kind of turn into a preacher on this stuff. And
Well, one of the concepts that brings up that is probably one misunderstood. You hear a lot of folks talk about this as it's just a savings vehicle. Well, it's just a savings vehicle. Well, no, there's so much more than that. And there's so many more access points that you have to that. And if you try to compare this to an investment, you're like, well, it's not an investment. This is not an investment. Show me a spot that you've got access to your capital while it's growing. And it just doesn't happen. So I constantly try to emphasize those 2 points as very basic points, but there's obviously many more conversations that stem from that.
Yeah, and you're also backstopped by the life insurance contract that God forbid something happens to you, we need money. Nelson used to say this. He goes, we need money when we're living, not when we're dead. And he was so right. That's when we have a need for capital. And instead, we're pouring thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars into these qualified plans. For instance, this is just one, but all you can get, Fidelity, I'll just pick on them. They're no different than the other ones, but you have access to 50% or half your amount of the capital that you have in there. And they're going to charge you a setup fee, and you're going to pay taxation twice, because when you put the money back in, it's after tax money. And when you take it out down the road, you're going to be taxed. So you're getting walloped on taxes and you don't even know it. Whereas if you had an infinite banking contract, oh my gosh, just go online, send me the money. It's in my account in a couple of days, and you deploy it and then put the money back.
Yeah.
It's easy.
You talk about infinite banking contracts. We're talking about the permanent dividend paying whole life insurance policies that are used
Yes.
for the infinite banking concept. Yeah, that strategy. Just so I say that just so somebody doesn't listen to this and they pick up the phone and call up their New York life agent and say, I want one of those banking policies.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? No.
Well, you do take some liberties, and we take so much for granted doing this all the time that yes, it's a whole life dividend income paying contract from a mutual company, preferably.
That's I'm not trying to ping. I'm just point out there. But I mean, it's across the board because the term infinite banking has now taken a life of its own out there. It is a descriptive term for Nelson's concept. And so everybody is an expert on infinite banking, okay, regardless of what your educational level is in the financial services industry and what type of product set that you're enamored with and what are you trying to sell. So the code word is infinite banking, unfortunately. And everybody takes liberties with that too. So
it's very true.
The next buzzword, right? Easy to find that on a search engine, but maybe not so easy to understand what's going on.
Right. Yep.
Well, John, when did you first meet Nelson?
Well, that was a great story. I was in my search for this perfect vehicle, which doesn't exist, but it's pretty darn good. I learned about this banking thing, and I read a book by this lady, and all it was a marketing tool. And so I was very frustrated. I couldn't get the information I want. I reverse engineered it. I mean, that's what pilots do. They want to find out why, right? So I spent a lot of time, and I went contacting one after the other insurance companies saying, I'm trying to find something that you can build this product in. And I found one. They said, yep, we do that. Wonderful. It's called infinite banking. Great. Short time after that, I was in Arizona, and I went to one of the insurance carriers meetings to introduce some new products. And I met a guy, John Webster, and John Webster listened to me. He said, have you talked to Nelson Nash? I go, who's Nelson Nash? He goes, oh, he's only the godfather of infinite banking, what you've been talking about. I said, oh, okay, great. So I picked up the phone. I called Nelson. And Nelson, as we all know, he has this southern drawl, just sweet guy, but very, very matter of fact and direct. And I talked to him on the phone. And he goes, tell you what, John, you fly an airplane, don't you? I said, yes, sir, I do. He goes, here, what are you doing Tuesday? I said, well, Nelson, I'm free Tuesday. He goes, here's what you're going to do. You're going to jump on one of those airplanes, and you're going to come to Birmingham, and we're going to have a little chat. I said, wonderful. So I flew to Birmingham. Nelson picked me up. He took me to the world headquarters, which was his office, and it's surrounded by books on every side. You know this, David, of course. And I looked at it, and I said, did you read all these books? And he says, every one of them. I said, holy cow, this guy is something. If he's read all, my dad was a big reader just like this. So I had an enormous amount of respect for somebody who read that much. And Nelson was so insightful. And it was my eureka moment, sitting talking to him about how I could do this. Because what I didn't mention is that I read his book before I came. And I'm like, no way. No. And then I sat and I began to probe it with him. And he shredded me. He didn't waste any time. Boom,
he was
boom,
nice
boom.
about it, though, wasn't he?
Huh?
He was nice about it.
Oh,
though.
he was very nice. When I say shredded, I mean he took my objections and just they were no longer objections. They in fact they became supporting documentation for infinite banking as he envisioned it. And I wanted to become a part of that. And I asked him how I could do that. I was already licensed. I'd already been in the business, and I learned about the 10%. And so I go, Nelson, how do I become a part of that 10%? Meaning I'm going to take, if you get 10% of the people moving in one direction, the other 90% will follow. I want to bring this to America too. How do I do that? How do I make other people's lives better? And he said, well, we have a practitioner program. And if you study and you buckle down and you go through our program, you're going to have to go through an interview with myself and Carlos Lara and Bob Murphy. And we'll certify you if your head's on straight, as he said. And fortunately, my head was on straight, and he accepted me into the program, and the rest is history. I've been doing this since 2017, 2016, whatever it was.
Yeah,
And
I think it was April of 17.
Okay. But it was the best day of my business life, meeting Nelson like that. He was just, he was a one of a kind human being. He had a heart of gold. He was a great businessman, and he understood money. He understood inflation. He understood taxation. And for anyone listening who wants to arrest the free fall of their finances because of taxation, it's confiscation, as he used to call it, and government intrusions into our lives, talk to a practitioner. Go out there and talk. You go to the Nelson Nash Institute, infinitebanking.org. Every state's got them. Call us. Jared and I would love to talk to you. We're licensed in all 50 states. But call and talk to somebody who's properly trained in this stuff, because it will make a life-saving difference in your financial future. Just will. Guaranteed. And if it doesn't, call me up. I'll give you my home address and you can come punch me in the nose. But this stuff works. I guarantee it.
So then, John and Jared, how did y'all connect? You both are, aviators. How was that? How did you meet each other?
Well, for me, it was through the practitioner finder. Looking through, who was local, who was nearby that I could go have a coffee with and talk about, something along these lines and what that would look like. What were the next steps? How would you get moved along the way on this? So it was the practitioner finder.
Yeah. And there's so much we give and take with Jared and I, because you can, when you're flying airplanes, everything is standardized and you know what to expect from the other person. You run a checklist and you're expecting something from that other guy. Jared and I are cut from that same cloth. Jared is a 330 instructor pilot. He knows that airplane inside. I'm on the 350. I've flown other airplanes, but the system that you follow is the same. The discipline that's needed to fly airplanes is no different in many respects than infinite banking. Nelson talked about, don't be afraid to capitalize your policy. You have to be disciplined, and you don't want to steal the peas. Those that have read the book, you bring the product out the front door, you pay for them like everybody else. Why that's related is because there's a discipline there. It's how we approach money, how Jared and I, we have this camaraderie of aviation. Nelson, of course, was an aviator. Nelson was a great pilot. So there's a lot of cool interchanges there between all of us.
Yeah, he'd be the first one to tell you that he was a great pilot, right?
Well,
I mean, Lee's mother's got a couple stories about his great aviation skill set that'll like freak you out, but whatever. But yeah, quick story. He kept buying airplanes, and you know how we found out about it? It would be we check our policies and be a big loan on a policy. It's like, where'd that come from? Oh, a blown airplane. No. And I'm paying it back. I'm being honest maker. But he used to. He flew. He loved to fly. Flew over the planet, and every now and then I go with him because I'm a rotor wing guy. So it's the hard part about me flying fixed wing is the sight picture on approach. It's like I feel like I'm going down a roller coaster where a rotor wing you got to fly. Sight picture like that. So it's like going down an elevator or escalator. Anyway, he goes, let's go. We're gonna go. We're flying somewhere. Let's go to the airport. We go to the airport, and I say, I'm used to, like you said, standardizations and whatnot. It's like, are we doing a flight plan? Yeah, we'll call the tower. We'll tell them what we're doing. What about weather? He goes, I watched CNN this morning before I left the house. No, that was weather forecasting, man. You watch the news.
I don't believe that because I know that Nelson looked at it. I know the kind of guy he was. He knew, and he had a much deeper understanding of the weather than just that. But he was saying that because that's his comical way of communicating.
Well,
yeah.
he might go to some little airport somewhere and have a weather transcriber. He might glance at that, right? Okay, and so, well, anyway, so he was a good aviator. I think he flew. Well, I don't want to steal the thunder here, but he knocked his front teeth out landing an aircraft. They had maybe like an hour and a half in it. Okay. He had no, he shouldn't have been in that thing in the first place.
Now you go back to World War I, they had a life expectancy of 17 days. So it's perspective, right?
Well, so Jared, as you are now, becoming a practitioner and going through the program, talk to us a little bit about the mentorship that John is providing for you and the importance of that.
Yeah, that's such an important piece. I mean, just seeing how John operates with starting policies and getting that conversation going, the questions that are asked, and it's very much a lead by example type of a setup, because I've been able to really, I call it get under the wing because it's like an aviation term, right? But I've been able to see how he does business and how he asks the questions and how important that is. And so being able to watch that firsthand on the other side as a potential client, and then to move past the client into a practitioner position on what does it look like to, grow these roles and grow this position in terms of, what that looks like, and just him to be the support through that whole process. If there's ever been a question, even if he doesn't know the answer, he'll be honest and be like, I'm not really sure on that one, but let's go dig on it together. Or 9 times out of 10, he gives me the answer and just slaps me in the face with it, because it's something that I'd tried to pick up a book for or tried to grab through a concept, and I just didn't get it. And so when I reach out to him, he's 9 times out of 10 got the answer. So it's been amazing to have that resource and to have, John be as available as he has for, learning the various process.
It helps having great student practitioners too, because Jerry he's a savage reader and has got a very, very keen intellect. That helps a lot.
I was lucky. My dad taught me a lot about money growing up. He never taught me about this, but he taught me a lot about how it works and where it goes and how to manage it properly. So I was very fortunate to have that type of a, groundwork. But there's a lot of these things that just didn't, like I said, I didn't catch it at first. So it took a little while.
Well, it's a paradigm shift. It's, if you grow up in America, then you've heard the same things since you can first remember about how money works. And it's all about follow the leader, right?
It really is. I mean, I remember as a 22-year-old first officer at a regional airline, just being excited to fly jets around. And then at 24, only 2 years later, making captain, and your salary doubles. And I took all of that doubled salary and put it into my 401k. I just thought that's what you're supposed to do. Now, it come to find out I was setting good habit patterns in terms of not living outside of my means, but I could have been putting that in a very different, more advantageous position. So, very fortunate on the path that's come thus far and the habits that are there, but there's still lessons learned.
And you talk about putting it inside of a 401k, and one of the illustrations that I show people is the only difference between a qualified plan and a non-qualified plan, all things being equal, the amount of taxation, the rate that you're going to experience on the back end. That's it. It's called the commutative property of multiplication. So if you put money in, it doesn't matter what variable you change, the interest rate, the amount you put in, up, down markets, doesn't matter. And you run those numbers, and I can show them to you, that you plug in anything you want, and you do the same thing on both sides. One's in a qualified and the other's in a non-qualified. You're going to have a much bigger number at the end of that cycle of numbers on a non-qualified plan, or qualified plan. But then you pay the taxes on it, and if the taxes are the same, the numbers are identical to the penny. People don't understand that. They think by deferred taxation, they're somehow saving money. They're not. The only thing they're banking on is that they're going to pay a lower income tax rate on the back end. We've got $7 trillion of debt. How's that going to get paid? It's got to get dealt with somehow. and they're already looking at what they can do to go after the money. There's about $19 trillion in qualified money right now. Well, how does that all fit into that equation? I'm not going to leave it to the politicians to figure this out. I want to control it, because if you don't control your money, it's not yours yet. If it's sitting in a qualified plan, if you had $1 million sitting in a 401k, go try to get that money. You can't have it. You can get a $50,000 loan and pay double taxation, but you can't have your own money. They're using your money. I want to use my own money. It's so powerful when you understand, you call it a paradigm shift, David, where you are taking the money and you control the flow of capital, which is what Nelson has taught from day one, versus the bankers or the other financial institutions that control your assets under management. And they're getting their 1%, 2%, 3% fees. And those are going out into perpetuity until you take your money away from them. I don't like that. I don't like that setup.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you're right. It's, you're doomed to surprises. I've always wondered, where exactly is that money sitting somewhere? That 401k money, is it sitting somewhere? No, it's a number on a page is all it is.
and that's brings up the whole fractional reserve banking thing, which you could do an entire podcast on that, couldn't you? But it's inflationary. And every time you give a bank $1, if the reserves are at 10%, and they're less than that now, but they can lend out 90% of that money, and that bank can lend out 90% of that money on down the line. And Jared, we did a thing on this where you went out 6 iterations, and it was like 50, what was it, like 5.8 or 6.8 times, whatever that figure was.
Yeah, I think if you started with 10,000 and did it 6 times down the chain, you ended up with, almost just short of $57,000.
Yeah, I mean, from that 10 grand turned into 57. Yeah. That does not happen in an infinite banking contract. It's dollar for dollar. When I pull money out of I borrow from the general funds of the life insurance company, they're guaranteed 100% with that money. It's not levered. It's not fractionalized.
Inflationary in nature. For sure.
Not at all.
That's
it
right.
Doesn't cause inflation in that system. We live in as Nelson talked about, we share this giant pool of money.
Well, you talked about being an Austrian, so I guess that clicked with you, Nelson, too. And he saw that, what was really happening behind the scenes with the Federal Reserve and all that noise. So I guess that was another common theme you had with him, the Austrian connection, and how IBC, quote unquote, is Austrian economics in action at the UME level. There's another Nelsonism. So, yeah.
Having done a little, digging into some of the Austrian piece, I know that's a really big part of the practitioner program, but having done just a little bit of digging there's not much more basic of a description than that's individual economy and how you control your individual economy, which I think that's what also brings the huge asset of the IBC concepts or the infinite banking concepts is it's individual and you can do it. We're not talking about you have to have $1 billion to go start this account. You don't have to have hundreds of $1 billion in management. At your household level, whatever that is, wherever you're starting, you can make that happen. You can be a part of that Austrian economics model of smart SIP spending and smart saving. That was another part that blew my mind, was just, this isn't just for your big banker, your hedge fund owner. This is for everybody. And that kind of brought it home to me.
It's just a matter of scale, and you start where you can, and you keep growing.
That's right.
Nelson started off with, I think, about 4 or 5 policies, ended up with 45.
That was 42. That's pretty good, though.
And then he started giving them away to family members.
That's not a bad thing. That's a good place to be.
Yeah, but you might have a couple of airplane loans on the policy that you get, though.
Oh, I remember that. That's right.
You inherited some airplane loans.
Yeah, some airplane loans. It's like, how come my name's not on that airplane?
Did you get the airplane with it?
No.
Oh, that's gold.
He'd buy and sell airplanes like crazy because he loved it. And the last one he bought was a twin engine Beagle. And you probably never heard of it before. It was like an A-place.
Never heard of a Beagle.
Twin engine, had twin Continentals. I think it was a British aircraft, and it was the same thing as these little fixed wing aircraft. They get a contract with the military. You have to produce X number of aircraft, and they all ended up being civilian aircraft. So he just was enamored with this Beagle. You can look it up on the internet, a beagle. And so he found one and bought it. And I think he flew it maybe 20 times and said, man, this thing's a dog. So,
Which is why we haven't heard of it, David, because it didn't get much traction out there in the commercial market.
Well, they say that there's old pilots, there's bold pilots, but there's not old and bold pilots.
Well, so John, how have you grown in your practice since you've started implementing the infinite banking concept?
Well, I think that goes to the heart of understanding what infinite banking is. And there's a growth trajectory you follow. Everyone's is different. Mine was going from from product to process. Because early on, I'm thinking, well, how do I build these things? What do I do? And it's the mechanics like Lego blocks, putting it together. But understanding that it's so much more than just a construct. It's about a long-term view. It's about how this thing will grow, and it takes on a life. You're taking the sum of the parts and it's becoming an IBC contract. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's what I learned, that you have all these different parts that make up an IBC contract, and by themselves, they're no big deal. But you put them together correctly, you really begin to get something that is unique, that's powerful, that is transgenerational. You're moving your money across time, so you can use it, your family can use it, and when you're gone, you're contributing to the growth and the good fortune, financial good fortune of your family long after you're not here to make those decisions. So it's an exciting thing. It's an exciting thing when you understand that infinite banking is not a thing. It's not transactional. It's a process. Nelson always used to talk about it, and that was one of the most difficult things for me, because I'm kind of analytical about stuff. Every piece has got to fit. It's got to make sense. And Nelson's like, no, it's a process. You're getting wrapped up in the minutia. Stop doing that. And that was so helpful when he used to kind of knock you down in a nice way. He'd do it in a nice way. He'd just redirect your focus and says, you're not looking at the big picture here. What the big picture is, you're building this entity through this process going forward, which is going to be there for you and your family and your family's family down the road for a very long time. If you do it right and you teach, and that's the other part about it, is teaching your family. So it's not just me knowing, it's about your family knowing how to do this and transitioning over. So when I'm not there, that they know how to operate with it. Antoinette, my wife, she could teach this stuff. She knows as well as I do, because she had to sit and listen to me do all the Q&A.
Well, yeah, Jared, what has been the biggest surprise for you since you've started this process?
I mean, I'm only, a year and a half in since even opening our own policies. The actual construction of the policies and how that's helped us financially, whether we're, getting a loan for a vehicle or prepping for an undesired scenario, whatever that looks like, just being able to see that and the comfort of that brings, and then allows our family in terms of flexibility, has been amazing. So that part has been truly remarkable. But then, starting the process as a practitioner and getting involved in that and the learning and the reading, oh my goodness. I have not been a huge fan of reading in general. I'm a show me a video guy. Let me read the audiobook. That doesn't cut it here. You gotta dive in, you gotta go for it. And so I'm learning to appreciate and read some of the books and the pieces that really add to the wealth that's needed. So it's been a really cool process, and I'm really excited for what it might bring in the future.
Well, and John, you've been an authorized IBC practitioner for several years, as we mentioned earlier. Talk a little bit about that community and, what that community means to you.
Oh, huge. I've only missed one think tank, and David probably knows this, and it's because I was going through some training last year. I will be at the next think tank. There is not a finer group of people collected under one room than the infinite banking practitioners and their guests. It's just, there's no competition. Only that they're showing how they do something. So you got a bunch of teachers who want to teach, and they've got great hearts. And I had Nelson was a strong Christian Baptist, and I grew up Catholic. But man, did he resonate with me. He was just so down to earth and such a good human being that's transmitted all through this crowd. All these people came from different walks of life, even different religions, but we all congregate into the same place with the same mission to bring infinite banking to America because it works. It's a good thing and it makes people better. And it for many, it's their financial salvation because had they not had this, who knows where they would have wound up. I can tell you story after story of why people said, oh my gosh, I am so glad I did this 10 years ago today, because it's made all the difference in my ability to make much better decisions. If you can't make the decision because you're not in a position to do it, how terrible is that? But we can put people in a position who don't even know 10 years down the road what they're going to be facing. But because of what all these people did under that roof with their good hearts are going out and making this available and showing people how to do this, that the problems that they're solving down the road that haven't even popped up yet is it's fantastic to me. It's just a wonderful thing. Tremendous.
Yeah, there was an article that compared the how not to look at this through the ROI lens, kind of confronting an investment thinking capitalization strategy type of a mindset. And when I went to dig it up to see when it was written or where it came from, it was written in 2019. But man, does that transcend the time, because I was just having a conversation about that with somebody that they just couldn't get past. When you put it paper to paper on an ROI type of a thing, I was like, you're missing the forest for the trees here. There is so many more things that you're not including that don't necessarily add to this ROI number that you're looking at. So it's not something that, when I'm having that conversation with that person, that I'm trying to bang it into their head so that they understand. Like, that's not the case at all. And if there's nothing else I've learned from John, you've just got to ask questions. Ask questions, because if it's not figured out and if it's not understood, that's okay too. And not everybody's going to catch it, and not everyone's going to understand the answer to the question.
And the questions, shout out to Mary Jo Ehrman. I mean, my goodness, I remember going to her with the problem at one of the think tanks, and Jared and I just did a podcast on this, and she hit me hard about asking enough questions, because I was having some difficulty with one of my clients, and I went home and I said, you know what, I'm not asking enough questions. So shout out to Mary Jo for that, because I now ask quite a few more questions than I used to, because I would assume we tend to put ourselves in other people's shoes and say, okay, this is what you need to do. No, that's not good enough. You need to put yourself in their shoes after you've heard what they have to say, because it's after you've heard their viewpoints and their problems and their hot button issues, it modifies sometimes substantially what you think you should do. So questions, very important, and the right questions.
Yeah, Mary Jo, she's special, man. I'll tell you what. So
Yeah, she is incredible connecting with her clients. And, part of the practitioner program is this coaching academy that we now have launched. And, that is all focused on becoming your own banker. And it is a deep dive into becoming your own banker. But Mary Jo does a fantastic presentation on just the introduction of the book alone. And then she goes in and to talk about, the client meetings. And she just is so generous to share that knowledge with everyone in the room. And that's what I think the greater takeaway is of the Nelson Nash Institute community and these authorized practitioners, is everyone is just so generous, and they want this to be everyone to do this the right way, and for this to be practiced correctly and to impact so many lives. And we've heard countless stories about clients, and Jared, you're a beautiful story of that. Thank you for sharing that with us in this podcast. John, what about other clients that you've come across where this infinite banking concept has impacted their lives generationally?
Generationally, 9 years is kind of a short window, 10 years, whatever it is. But as far as impact on other clients, I've had clients that were, I could tell a quick story about a guy who had an apartment. He lived in an apartment building, and he had just this one unit, and his dream was to own that. And I said, well, why can't you own it? And so the discussion, again, it was into questions. He was putting money into a 401k. And so I said, look, why don't we stop putting money into a 401k? Why don't we put it into this policy? Why don't we build it up enough for you to buy that? And he goes, well, can I do that? Yeah, you can. And so that's what he ultimately wound up doing. This guy worked for a municipality. He didn't have a great deal of money, great deal of assets, and he wound up buying that, ultimately, the one next door. And then I think he's got 2 or 3, like 4 of them now, starting with beginning with just taking money from his 401k and levering it into properties that he could purchase. So there is a pronounced effect that would have not happened had not Nelson introduced the infinite banking concept to us and to me. I brought this to this guy, showed him a pathway, he embraced it, and he's done wonderful things with it. So there's another example, and there's plenty more.
That's the multifaceted benefit of having a financial foundation like IBC, like a portfolio of whole life policies where you can launch them to take advantage of opportunities, or as a guard against the financial downfalls, and either side of that equation.
Well, you got to know where the money is coming from and where it's going. You have to understand your own personal cash flow. And if you can isolate it, you can figure out a pathway to make IBC work for you. It could be small, it could be big. It doesn't have to be big. But by starting small, you can, as we've talked, Nelson, 45 contracts year over year, you can add to these things. You fill up the bucket. And I asked Nelson one time, how big of a bucket do I make? He goes, well, do you have money on, do you have any excess funds at the end of the year? Well, yeah. He goes, well, then you need to start another contract. It was a very simple discussion. This stuff is not hard. It's here's the size of the bucket that you're going to fill. It's going to grow tax-free. When it gets your source of funds or beyond that, start another contract and keep laying it over. And when you borrow from the contract, pay it back. Such a critical component. That's another thing that people don't do all the time, that you have to constantly repeat and say, don't steal the bees, put the money back. A couple of instances where those issues have surfaced.
John, we end every episode by asking, what does the infinite banking concept mean to you?
Well, quite simply, it means economic freedom. Economic freedom. You cannot have personal freedom unless you have economic freedom. And this goes back to the Austrian roots of what I believe. But the infinite banking concept allows the average guy and gal to find economic freedom, where they don't have to rely on the government. They don't have to rely on anybody else but themselves. They can build this warehouse of wealth. There's a book called that Nelson has written, where you can essentially separate yourself from the madness that's out there and distill it down to the you and me level, where you can take care of the capitalization for the things of life. It builds personal economic freedom. And I can't think of a more wonderful gift to give to somebody else.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, John and Jared, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much, Lee. David, thank you so much for having us and hosting us. It was a real treat. Thank you.